The air in the room holds its breath. It smells like stale coffee and betrayal. He stands across from me, a sheet of paper clutched in his hand, his face a mask of false authority, a cruel smile playing on his lips. This is it, the moment he thinks he wins. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is when you hear this. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know, bringing these stories to life. We build a life here, or so I thought. In this apartment on the third floor. For large windows looking out over the street, the afternoon sun spilling onto the worn hardwood floors. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. A place we painted together, argued in, made up in. It was the backdrop to a decade of my life, the walls that held my laughter, my tears, my dreams. When we first moved in, the building felt solid, reliable. Old brick, maybe a little creaky, but it had character. He'd talked about our future, nestled here. The way he'd put his arm around my shoulder, pointing out the window, talking about watching seasons change from our view. It felt real, anchored. I pour myself into this place. Not just emotionally, though God knows I did that. I poured in time, effort, money. When the roof leaked in 2015, it was my savings that patched it, not his. When the old boiler finally died, I negotiated with the landlord, a distant corporate entity back then, and fronted half the replacement cost, an investment. He'd called it a way to show we were serious tenants, here for the long haul. An investment that, years later, paid dividends I never expected, in a currency he couldn't comprehend. Our life wasn't perfect, whose is? But it had a rhythm. Mornings with coffee, evenings with takeout on the couch. Weekends spent browsing dusty antique shops, imagining filling this apartment with treasures. There were cracks, sure. His temper sometimes. A certain carelessness with my feelings, a growing disconnect I'd brushed off as just the slow fade of passion that happens over time. We were comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. Comfortable enough for him to forget things. Important things. Things like respect. Things like my name. The notice came on a Tuesday. Buried in a stack of junk mail, nestled between pizza flyers and credit card offers. An official-looking envelope addressed to him. I opened it, thinking it was something mundane. A rent increase notice, maybe. My fingers fumbled with the paper, unfolding it. The word swam at first. Legal jargon. Until I saw it. My name. Absent. It was a lease renewal. Signed. Only his name was on it. Mine had been removed. Erased. Like I was never here. The blood drained from my face. The apartment felt suddenly cold, alien. The sun through the windows seemed harsh, mocking. I reread the document, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. There had to be a mistake. A clerical error. My name had always been on the lease. From day one. I confronted him that evening. He was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, the blue light reflecting in his eyes. He didn't look up when I held out the paper. What's this? I managed, my voice thin, trembling. He sighed, a heavy, put-upon sound. Oh, that. Yeah, I signed the new lease. My name isn't on it, I said, my voice gaining a tremor. He finally lowered the phone, looking annoyed. Yeah, well. The landlord said it was easier. Less paperwork. Easier? Less paperwork? My home, my stability, reduced to paperwork. Easier for who? I asked, the tremor turning to a shake. Why would you do this without talking to me? He shrugged, dismissive. It's just a formality. We're married, aren't we? It doesn't change anything. But it changed everything. It was a line drawn in the sand. A statement. You are not on paper. You are expendable. The argument that followed was brutal. Not loud at first. Just cold, cutting words that sliced deeper than any shout. He accused me of overreacting, of being dramatic. He said I didn't understand how things worked, that men handled these things. Men. As if I were a child. As if my decade here, my money, my life, meant nothing because I didn't have the right anatomy to handle paperwork. I stayed up all night, the lease renewal notice lying on the kitchen counter like a dead thing. Every creak of the old building sounded ominous. The familiar layout of the apartment felt like a cage. I walked from room to room, touching the things we'd collected. The lamp we bought at that antique shop. The rug I'd haggled for. The bookshelf groaning under the weight of our books. None of it felt like mine anymore. Not really. Because according to that paper, I didn't live here. Not officially. The days that followed were a blur of frantic calls and dead ends. I called the management company listed on the lease. A polite but firm voice informed me that according to their records, the apartment was leased solely to him. They couldn't discuss the details of his lease with me, as I was not a named tenant. I tried to explain my situation, our history, my previous financial contributions. They listened patiently, then repeated the same line. Data privacy. Not on the lease. Can't help you. Click. The phone went dead in my hand, the silence screaming louder than any argument. I spoke to a lawyer, a family friend. He was sympathetic but blunt. Without my name on the current lease, my legal standing was precarious. Marriage offered some protection, but the lease was a primary document for residency. It complicated things. Severely. He talked about martial assets, long legal battles, the difficulty of proving my decade-long tenancy, and contributions against a signed legal document. It felt overwhelming. A mountain I didn't know how to climb. Living with him became unbearable. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. He grew bolder, treating the apartment less like our shared home and more like his domain. Small things at first. Leaving his mess everywhere, expecting me to clean it up like some kind of live-in housekeeper he hadn't hired. Turning the TV volume up late at night, ignoring my requests to lower it. The subtle shift in power dynamic was palpable, suffocating. He held the lease, the key to my physical space, and he knew it. He started dropping hints. Casual comments about needing more space, about wanting a different kind of life. Remarks that felt like carefully placed landmines. Maybe I should get a roommate, he'd say, watching my reaction. Or, this place feels a bit small now, doesn't it? Each word was a tiny chip at the foundation of my security. The worst part wasn't the fear of being homeless. It was the feeling of being erased. Like the past decade, our shared history in these walls was just a figment of my imagination. He was systematically dismantling our life, piece by piece, starting with the most fundamental piece of paper. He brought a woman home one evening. She was blonde, too young, and she eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and veiled triumph. He introduced her as a friend. They laughed too loudly in the living room, his laughter booming, designed to penetrate the closed bedroom door where I sat, frozen. The apartment, our sanctuary, felt violated. Tainted. That night, lying awake, listening to the muffled sounds from the living room, something shifted inside me. The fear, the hurt, the confusion, they began to coalesce into something colder, harder. This wasn't just about a lease anymore. This was about dignity. About not letting him walk away with everything, leaving me with nothing but the ghost of a life I thought was real. I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Honey, never put all your gold in one easily found box. Have your secrets. They can be your shield. Grandma Rose was a woman of few words, but immense wisdom. She'd navigated her own storms with a quiet strength that I now envied and desperately needed. That thought about secrets and shields sparked something. A different line of thinking. I stopped looking at the lease as the problem. The lease was just a symptom of his perceived control over the building. The building. The old brick structure that had housed my life. I started looking at it differently. Not just as a backdrop, but as an entity in itself. Who owned it? The faceless corporation? Was there more to the story? I remembered bits and pieces. The building had changed hands a few times over the years we lived there. Once a local developer bought it, talked about renovations, then suddenly sold it again within months. There were rumors among the few long-term tenants about strange transactions, shell companies. I decided to follow Grandma Rose's advice. I started digging. Quietly. Secretly. I couldn't trust anyone. least of all him, who still shared the same air, the same rooms, but felt a million miles away. My digging wasn't fancy. It started online. Property records are public, after all. But the ownership was layered, hidden behind LLCs and holding companies, like a matryoshka doll of obfuscation. It was frustrating, slow work. Late nights hunched over my laptop after he'd gone to sleep, the screen illuminating my tired face, the silence of the apartment amplifying the click of the mouse, every sound a potential alert. I traced the ownership back through several layers. Each step was a puzzle piece. It led me from one corporate name to another, registered in different states, sometimes the same registered agent listed for multiple entities. It was a maze designed to confuse, to hide the true owner. Then I found a name that wasn't a corporation, a person, listed as the managing member of the final LLC in the chain, the beneficial owner. The name wasn't familiar. I ran searches, connected the dots through business registries, old news articles about local real estate deals. And then I found a connection, a small, almost insignificant detail in an archived Business Journal article about a property acquisition several years ago. The article mentioned this person, the managing member, and referenced their prior involvement in other local property deals. One of those deals was the purchase of a small, unassuming limited partnership, a limited partnership that I knew, from conversations years ago, my family had invested in. A partnership that was set up by my grandfather decades ago as a way to hold certain legacy assets. Assets that, upon his death, were distributed among his heirs, including me. A different kind of cold washed over me then. Not the cold of fear, but the cold of dawning, unbelievable realization. I pulled out old family papers, trust documents, investment portfolios my father had helped me set up years ago, urging me to diversify, to invest quietly, separately from anything related to my future married life. A woman needs her own ground, he'd said, echoing Grandma Rose in his own way. I'd listened, set it up, and, honestly, mostly forgotten about the specifics, trusting the financial advisor he'd recommended. I found the documents. Confirmation of my investment in that specific limited partnership. Dates matched. Names matched. The limited partnership owned, or was connected to owning, the LLC. The LLC owned the building. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from a sudden surge of adrenaline, a shockwave of power. It was a complex structure, intentionally designed to obscure. But following the thread, piece by piece, it led unequivocally to one place. To that limited partnership. To my share in it. To me. I didn't just live in this building. I didn't just help pay for its repairs. I was, through layers of corporate veil, one of its owners. A significant one. The world tilted on its axis. The fear I'd been living with for weeks evaporated, replaced by a chilling calm. He took my name off the lease, thinking he was taking away my home, my security, my very presence in his life. He thought he was holding all the cards. But he had no idea the game I was actually playing in, a game that was taking place miles above his head, in the stratosphere of ownership he didn't even know existed. This knowledge wasn't just a shield. It was a weapon. The deepening crisis took on a new dimension. Now, I wasn't just enduring his cruelty. I was observing it, cataloging it, using it as fuel. Every slight, every dismissive word, every night he stayed out late with his friend. It all added to the cold, hard resolve growing within me. I continued to play the part of the slightly bewildered, increasingly vulnerable wife he thought he was cornering. I let him think he was winning, let him gloat subtly. It made his eventual fall all the sweeter in my mind. I contacted my father's recommended financial advisor, Mr. Davies, an old-school professional, discreet, meticulous. I explained the situation cautiously at first. When I revealed the building, the LLC, the limited partnership, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. The apartment building, he asked, his voice slow, careful. Yes, I confirmed. My interest in the limited partnership. Does it mean what I think it means? Another pause. Ms. My last name, he said, using my maiden name, which he always did. That limited partnership acquired the controlling interest in the holding company that owns that particular property. Some years ago. You have a significant stake in that partnership. Yes. It means exactly what you think it means. You are, effectively, one of the primary owners of the building. The confirmation, spoken aloud by a third party, made it irrevocably real. The air crackled. Mr. Davies, understanding the sensitivity and the unique circumstances, was invaluable. He didn't blink an eye at the request for complete discretion. He began assembling the necessary documentation. The ownership trail laid bare. My rights. His complete and utter lack thereof. The plan formed quickly, efficiently. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice. About reclaiming what was mine. And about showing him the true cost of his arrogance. He continued his behavior. The friend became a regular fixture. They'd sit on our couch, drinking wine, talking about their plans. Plans that often involved this apartment. Redecorating, maybe? Getting a different view? They talked about me as if I were furniture, an inconvenient piece that needed to be moved. It was infuriating, dehumanizing. But I held my tongue, smiled politely, made my excuses, and retreated to the bedroom, where my laptop was open to legal documents, where my quiet war was being waged. The day I chose was deliberate. A Thursday. Mid-morning. He would be home, working from his makeshift office in the den. His friend wouldn't be there. This was between him and me, and the paper. I dressed carefully. Not in a power suit, nothing that would signal my intent. Just simple, elegant clothes that felt like me. I did my hair, applied makeup, looked in the mirror, and saw not the scared, bewildered woman of weeks ago, but someone else. Someone calm. Someone in control. Grandma Rose's shield, polished and ready. Mr. Davies and his associate were scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m. I spent the hour before their arrival in the living room, the room where he and his friend had made their plans, where he'd dismissed me. I sat on the couch, the one he'd sprawl on, scrolling, ignoring me. I looked around. This space. My space. His mistake. At 10 a.m. precisely, there was a knock on the door. My heart rate spiked, a single, hard beat, then settled into a steady, powerful rhythm. This is it. He emerged from the den, looking annoyed. He wasn't expecting anyone. He saw me by the door, a faint smile on my face. "Who is that?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Visitors," I said, my voice level. I opened the door. Mr. Davies and his associate, a formidable woman named Ms. Chen, stood in the hallway. They were impeccably dressed, briefcases in hand. They weren't just lawyers. They were executors of consequence. He stared, confused. "Who are you?" he asked them, turning to me with a glare. "What is this?" "These are my attorneys," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. They walked into the living room, their presence filling the space. He backed up, startled, into the center of the room. "Your attorneys? What are you talking about? What's going on?" His voice was rising, losing its false calm. Mr. Davies spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Good morning. We are here on behalf of our client, Ms. My first name, my last name." He looked at me, then back at them, his eyes darting between us. "Attorneys? For what? Is this about the lease?" He scoffed, a nervous sound. "You hired lawyers because your name isn't on the lease? That's ridiculous. I told you, it's just paperwork." Ms. Chen stepped forward, opening her briefcase. She pulled out a document, placing it on the coffee table. "This is not about the lease, Mr. His last name?" His eyes narrowed. "Then what is it about?" I walked over to the coffee table, standing beside Ms. Chen. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I married. The man who tried to erase me. His face was a mixture of confusion, annoyance, and a flicker of unease. "It's about this building," I said softly. He stared at me, then let out a short, sharp laugh. "The building? What about the building? I have the lease. Your name isn't on it." He gestured wildly with his hand, pointing at the floor, the walls. I control who lives here. No, I said. My voice was calm, steady, the calm before the storm breaks. You don't. Mr. Davies opened another folder, producing more documents. Share certificates, partnership agreements, corporate filings. He began to speak, laying out the structure, tracing the lines of ownership from the ground floor, through the LLCs, up to the limited partnership. He used precise legal language, but the meaning was crystal clear. As you can see, his last name, Mr. Davies stated, his voice gaining firmness. Our client, Ms. My first name, my last name, holds a controlling interest in the entity that owns this building. He stood frozen, staring at the papers on the table, then at me, then back at the lawyers. His mouth was slightly open.
What?
What are you talking about?
She
doesn't own the building. I live here. I have the lease. His voice was starting to tremble, not with feigned emotion, but with genuine shock. The lease grants you tenancy rights, Miss Chen interjected, her voice like ice. It does not grant you ownership. Our client's ownership predates your current lease agreement. Significantly. I watched his face. The color drained from it, leaving it pasty white. The cruel smile was gone, replaced by utter disbelief. He looked like he'd been hit by something invisible, something heavy. No, he whispered. No, that's not possible. You don't have that kind of money. You don't. I would know. You didn't know, I said, my voice still quiet. Because you never asked. Because you never bothered to look beyond yourself. You saw me as someone whose life you could just edit, like a document. You removed my name from a piece of paper, thinking that paper defined my reality here. I picked up the lease he'd signed, the one without my name. I held it up. This piece of paper, I said, my voice rising slightly, gaining the power I had held back for weeks. This piece of paper means nothing to me now. It's irrelevant. I dropped the lease back onto the coffee table. Ms. Chen slid another document forward. This one was shorter. An official notice. This document, she said, addressing him directly, her gaze unwavering, is a formal notice. As majority owner of this building, Ms. My last name is exercising her right to terminate your tenancy. His eyes fixated on the new paper. Terminate my?
He stammered.
You are being evicted, his last name. I finished for her. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. He stared at me, his eyes wide, wild. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of a shock, his dawning comprehension. Then he screamed. It wasn't a human sound, not really. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. A sound ripped from the gut of a man whose carefully constructed world had just imploded. You can't do that. I live here. I have the lease. You bitch. He lunged towards me. Before I could react, Miss Chun was instantly, smoothly between us. She didn't touch him, but her presence was a solid wall. Mr. Davies had already picked up his phone. Security will be here momentarily, Miss Chun said, her voice still calm, cutting through his screams. Any attempt to threaten or physically intimidate our client will result in further legal action. He stood there, chest heaving, face contorted with fury, spitting epithets. He couldn't touch me. He was powerless. The man who thought he could take my home was about to be thrown out of his. He screamed about betrayal, about how I'd planned this, how I'd lied. He was right, of course. I had planned. I had kept silent. But it wasn't a lie of commission, but a lie of omission. He'd never asked about my life before him, my family's history, my own resources. He'd made assumptions based on his own limited view of the world, of women. His own arrogance was his undoing. He screamed until his voice was hoarse. Screamed until the building's own security guards, alerted by Mr. Davies, arrived at the door, looking uncomfortable but resolute. They escorted him out. He fought at first, yelling, pointing at me, at the lawyers, his face red and contorted. But it was useless. He had no standing.
No lease. No ownership.
He was just a man being removed from a building he didn't own. I didn't watch him go. I turned away, walking back into the living room, leaving the lawyers to handle the logistics of his removal, the changing of locks, the inventory of his belongings. The apartment was silent again. The echoes of his screams seemed to linger in the air, trapped within the walls that were now unequivocally mine. I walked to the window, looking out at the street below. The sun was still shining.
Life was going on.
This building, it was solid.
Real.
More real than the life we'd pretended to build inside it. The walls held stories, yes, but they also held weight. The weight of ownership. The weight of consequence. The victory felt
Cold.
satisfying, yes. Deeply, profoundly satisfying to turn the tables on his cruelty. To see his face, that mask of control shatter into 1,000 pieces. But it wasn't joyful. It was the quiet stillness after a storm, the silence filled not with peace, but with the absence of noise, the debris still settling. I walked through the rooms. His things were still here, temporary invaders in my space. They would be dealt with professionally, legally. But their presence highlighted the emptiness. The relationship was gone, died in inches of neglect and disrespect, culminating in this final, explosive act of self-destruction on his part. I sat on the couch, the worn fabric familiar under my hands. This was my ground, my space, reclaimed. But the cost. The cost wasn't just legal fees or emotional strain. It was the realization that the person I had shared my life with, the person who promised forever, was capable of such cold calculation, such deep betrayal. That knowledge leaves a scar, cold and permanent. This building is mine now. The brick and mortar, the creaky floors, the view from the windows. It represents a new beginning, yes. A foundation built not on shared dreams that turned to dust, but on solid, undeniable fact. On ownership. On my own quiet strength and the forgotten investments of my past. But walking these halls alone, the silence stretches. The victory is mine, but the echoes of his screams and the silence of his absence are a constant reminder of the price paid. Home isn't just a place. It's meant to be a sanctuary built on trust. And once that trust is broken, even owning the very ground you stand on doesn't entirely fill the hole left behind. It's a powerful shield, this ownership, but the heart still remembers the wound. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt like your foundation was being shaken or taken from you, I'd love to hear your version. Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps keep this channel, these stories alive. Thank you for being here.